Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of golden light, endless sand, and the faint smell of something baking. A warm, earthy sweetness that clings to the air even before you've opened your eyes. You're in ancient Egypt, waking on a quiet morning beside the Nile, the river still wrapped in a soft mist that blurs the horizon. It's peaceful here, but you probably wouldn't survive this. Between the heat, the bugs, and the occasional crocodile, it's not exactly an Airbnb experience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far away, let me know where you are and what time it is right now. I always love seeing who's listening across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is just creeping over the eastern horizon, painting the Nile gold and pink. You stretch beneath a linen sheet, the fabric rough but cool, and you hear the faint slap of oars in the distance. Someone is already ferrying baskets of grain across the river, yesterday's harvest heading to the granary. A rooster calls, a donkey snorts. Somewhere close, someone yawns louder than they meant to. The air smells of silt and straw, and faintly, bread. Always bread. It's the quiet heartbeat of Egyptian life. You roll over and see smoke rising from a small mud brick house nearby. Inside, a woman is kneeling by a clay oven, one hand shielding her face from the heat while she slides out a round loaf, its surface cracked and golden. She taps it with her knuckle, just once, and the hollow sound says it's done. Breakfast 2500 BCE style. You step outside, feet sinking into the fine dust. Chickens scatter. A cat, probably half divine, threads between your legs with the same look of royal disinterest shared by every cat across time. In the distance, the temple walls shimmer, and beyond them, the river moves steadily, as if time itself is flowing through the valley. Bread is everywhere here. It's what people eat for breakfast, what they offer to the gods, what they bury with their dead. It's payment, sacrifice, comfort, all in one humble loaf. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians first stumbled upon leavened bread by accident. Some say a bowl of dough was left out too long and the wild yeasts did their magic, or whether it was a deliberate discovery born of experimentation. Either way, this morning ritual you're watching is one of humanity's oldest and most consistent acts, transforming grain and water into sustenance. You wander toward the riverbank, where the men are hauling bundles of barley and emmer wheat from reed boats. The grain glints in the light, pale and dry, like captured sunlight. You notice how the farmers handle it with care, even reverence. These aren't just crops, they're life insurance. A bad harvest doesn't mean inconvenience, it means famine. A good one? Enough bread for everyone, from the pharaoh to the fisherman. Nearby, a boy is grinding leftover stalks to feed to goats. He hums as he works, occasionally glancing up at you with that half smile that says, "What are you staring at, stranger?" You can't help but smile back. A priest walks by, robes pristine despite the dust, holding a tray of small loaves shaped like birds. These are offerings, bread for the gods. Egyptians believed their deities needed feeding too, though presumably they weren't picky about crust texture. Bread, beer, and the scent of burning incense formed the holy trinity of temple offerings. The gods might not eat the loaves literally, but the act of baking them, shaping them, and placing them in sacred spaces was a spiritual duty, as essential as prayer. You kneel by the river's edge, scooping up a handful of cool water. It's hard to imagine that this gentle stream floods with ferocity each year, turning dry plains into fertile soil. Without that rhythm, there'd be no grain, no bread, no Egypt at all. The Nile gives, the Nile takes. It's a cycle everyone here lives by. And there's something oddly comforting about it. You think about your own life, how everything, work, meals, routines, follows its own tide. Maybe that's why this place feels so hypnotic. Every motion here, from sewing to baking, repeats across generations until it becomes muscle memory. You look around and notice details your modern brain almost misses. A child carrying a basket of yeast cakes wrapped in palm leaves. A man patching the thatch roof of a granary. An old woman crumbling yesterday's stale bread into soup. Even the dogs seem to understand the rhythm of the day. Bread isn't just food here, it's time itself, divided into rises and falls, waiting and working, sunrise and sunset. A cool breeze drifts over from the river, carrying the scent of wet clay and ash. Somewhere nearby, laughter breaks out as a young woman accidentally drops a loaf into the dart. "The gods won't mind," someone jokes, and she dusts it off, smiling sheepishly. It's easy to forget that these ancient people, immortalized in stone and hieroglyphs, laughed, teased, and spilled things just like anyone else. A quirky fact: archaeologists have actually found ancient Egyptian loaves so perfectly preserved by desert dryness that you can still see fingerprints pressed into the dough. Some even have tiny paw prints from dogs or cats who clearly couldn't resist. Those loaves, baked nearly 4,000 years ago, still whisper of mornings like this one, ordinary, beautiful, and entirely human. But it wasn't all idyllic. Bread making was tough work. The constant grinding of grain with stone corns meant that flour often contained bits of grit and sand. Over time, that wore down people's teeth to painful nubs. The average Egyptian smile, historians say, was more ow than wow. Yet they kept eating, kept baking, kept feeding one another. Because what else was there to do? You watch as the first fresh loaves are stacked in reed baskets, their crusts cracking as they cool. A few are brushed with honey, others sprinkled with sesame. The smell is intoxicating. Someone breaks a loaf open, and a small puff of steam escapes. Proof that, yes, even 3,000 years ago, there was no better smell than fresh bread. As the day begins to heat, you retreat into the shade of a fig tree. The ground beneath you is warm, and the breeze rustles through the leaves with a sound like distant whispering. Somewhere far off, a scribe's reed pen scratches across papyrus, recording grain rations for the workers building a noble's tomb. Bread again, counted, measured, controlled. It's currency, nutrition, and religion all at once. You take another look toward the houses, where the ovens still glow faintly red. The cycle continues: harvest to flour, flour to dough, dough to bread, bread to life. It's strange to think that in thousands of years, people will still be doing the same thing, still chasing that smell, that comfort, that golden crust. You lie back, eyes half closed, and listen to the sounds of the village. The rhythmic thump of cornstones, the chatter of women kneading dough, the splash of water at the riverbank. It all blends into a sleepy music that hums through the valley. And as your breathing slows, you realize something gentle but profound. For all our technology and change, the heart of human life hasn't moved far from this riverside. We still gather, grind, bake, and break bread together. The morning light grows softer, and somewhere nearby, someone calls your name. Not urgently, just invitingly. The smell of baking returns, stronger now, and you know it's time to see where this bread's journey really begins. You walk down toward the fields, where the Nile's gift stretches out before you in green and gold. The flood has long since receded, leaving behind dark soil so rich it feels alive under your feet. The air hums faintly with insects, and the faint scent of damp earth rises as you step between rows of ripened barley and emmer wheat, the two ancient grains that make Egyptian bread possible. The stalks sway gently, whispering against each other in a kind of dry applause. You reach out and let your fingers trail along the tops. The barley heads are rough, and a few loose husks cling to your sleeve. A farmer nearby laughs softly and says something in the old Egyptian tongue, probably a joke about how city hands never know how to handle grain properly. You give a half shrug and pretend you meant to do it that way. It's early enough that the sun still feels kind. A thin haze drapes the horizon, muting the edges of everything in gold. The farmers move slowly, rhythmically, as if they've been doing this same dance for centuries. Because, well, they have. Bent backs, tanned skin, practiced movements, a living pattern of survival. They hold sickles made of wood inset with flint blades that catch the light in little sparks as they swing. Historians still argue whether these farmers were free workers earning rations or bound laborers paying off taxes in sweat. It's one of those scholarly debates that never quite ends. But either way, you can feel that quiet dignity in their work. The steady pace, the unspoken teamwork, the murmured songs that ripple through the air like a second breeze. One man leads the singing. His voice is deep, unhurried, carrying verses about the Nile, the gods, and a particularly lazy ox. The others join in the refrain, timing their swings to the beat. It's hypnotic. The swish of sickles, the rustle of stalks, the soft thud as each bundle falls. You could fall asleep right here, lulled by the rhythm of it all. You notice that emmer wheat, the grain they prize most for bread, is not easy to handle. Its husk clings stubbornly to the seed, unlike modern wheat. That means extra steps later, soaking, pounding, sifting, all before it can even think about being flour. Still, the Egyptians loved it. Emmer made hearty bread that could last through long journeys or hot days without spoiling. Plus, it gave their loaves that dense, nutty flavor that, if you ignore the occasional sand crunch, probably wasn't half bad. A little girl runs past, carrying a small clay jar filled with water for her father. He pauses his cutting, drinks, and pours the last drops over his head with a sigh. She giggles, and he grins back before returning to work. Life out here is simple, but not joyless. Every harvest means security, a full granary, satisfied bellies, another year survived. You kneel down and grab a handful of soil. It's thick and dark, almost black. This is Kemet, the black land, the fertile strip that hugs the Nile. Beyond it lies Deshret, the red land, the dry desert that stretches endlessly outward. Two worlds side by side, one feeding life, the other reminding you not to take it for granted. A quirky fact surfaces as you watch the farmers work. Ancient Egyptians were so dependent on the Nile's annual flood that they built their calendar around it. 3 seasons: Akhet for flooding, Peret for planting, and Shemu for harvest. Right now, you're deep in Shemu, the season of reaping, when the year's labor comes to fruition. Even time itself here bends to the rhythm of bread. The farmers gather the cut stalks into bundles and tie them with reeds. Donkeys bray and protest as they're loaded with grain, clearly not thrilled about the arrangement. One man pats his donkey's neck and mutters something that's probably the ancient equivalent of, "Come on, buddy, it's almost lunch." You smile. The donkey doesn't. As you walk farther along the edge of the field, you see irrigation channels snaking through the land, narrow ditches filled with slow-moving water. The Nile's flood was generous but unpredictable, so these canals were Egypt's insurance policy. With shadoofs, simple hand cranes with counterweights, farmers lift water from the canals to the higher fields. The creak of wooden poles and the splash of falling water join the chorus of harvest sounds. It's oddly soothing, like an ancient metronome keeping time for civilization. Bread starts here, you realize, not in the oven or the kitchen, but in this sun-baked field, where every kernel is hard-won. It's humbling to think how many hands touch each loaf before it's eaten. The farmer, the thresher, the miller, the baker. A whole economy of effort behind a single bite. You catch sight of a scribe sitting under a palm tree with a small writing kit, a wooden palette, reed pens, and a strip of papyrus. He's not farming, but he's just as busy. Every bundle of grain is counted, recorded, taxed. Bread, after all, isn't just food, it's math. The state takes its share, temples take theirs, and the rest feeds everyone else. The scribe's careful marks in ink will decide how much bread each worker gets later. You almost feel sorry for him, squinting in the heat, surrounded by dust. Almost. Historians still argue whether these record keepers exaggerated their numbers to please officials. Some ancient texts praise miraculous harvests that, realistically, sound a bit too miraculous. Bureaucracy and embellishment, apparently, those are ancient too. A cool wind ripples through the fields, bending the golden heads of barley. You hear a woman nearby telling her son to thank Hapi, the god of the Nile, for this abundance. The boy folds his hands, mumbles something solemn-sounding, and then immediately goes back to chasing a frog. Reverence has its limits when you're 6. The work continues through the morning. Sweat glistens on foreheads, voices grow hoarse, yet there's a calm efficiency in it all. No one rushes, no one complains. They know the rhythm by heart. The harvest is not just labor, it's ceremony. The first cut of grain is often offered to the gods, placed in a small basket at the field's edge. A prayer follows, short and familiar. You can almost hear the generations behind it. Someone hands you a piece of flatbread from their satchel, a worker's lunch. It's dense, chewy, with that slightly sour tang of natural fermentation. There's grit in it, sure, but it's surprisingly good. You chew slowly, thinking how this simple meal connects you across thousands of years. The same ingredients, the same taste, the same sun on your skin. As the sun climbs higher, the singing fades, replaced by the hum of cicadas. The farmers rest beneath a cluster of date palms, tearing off chunks of bread and dipping them in a paste of lentils and herbs. One man jokes about the gods needing a break too, and everyone laughs. You can't help but notice how humor survives even under hard labor. Maybe laughter, like bread, is another kind of sustenance. By midday, the field glows like fire, the air shimmering with heat. The work slows, but no one stops completely. The farmers know the rhythm. Push now, rest later. The donkeys stand drowsy and patient, tails flicking lazily at flies. The smell of crushed stalks mixes with sweat and sun-baked earth. It's strangely intoxicating, a scent of effort and reward intertwined. You glance toward the horizon, where, far away, the pyramids cut clean lines against the blue sky. Even they, those impossible monuments, depend on this humble grain. The workers who built them were paid in bread and beer, the twin pillars of Egyptian nutrition. The thought makes you smile. Civilization itself was, quite literally, built on carbs. By the time the last bundle is stacked, the light begins to mellow again. Shadows stretch long and thin across the fields. You can hear laughter drifting from the river as the boats return, piled with grain sacks bound for the granaries. The air cools slightly, and the day's hum quiets to a purr. You brush the dust from your clothes, take one last look at the shimmering wheat, and realize that bread's journey is only beginning. Soon, this grain will be threshed, ground, and transformed into the substance that sustains gods and laborers alike. But for now, it rests, just as you should. You follow the slow line of donkeys back toward the village, the scent of baking once again reaching your nose. It's almost as if the day's harvest is calling you home, reminding you that the cycle never really ends. Tomorrow, the fields will be empty, the ovens full, and somewhere in the middle of it all, you'll still be walking, quietly, curiously, through the golden heart of Egypt. By the time you reach the village threshing ground, the sun is already dipping westward, and the air shimmers like liquid glass. The harvest has been hauled in, towering heaps of barley and emmer wheat piled high, glowing pale gold in the fading light. The air hums with dust and laughter. Chickens dart underfoot, pecking at stray kernels. Somewhere, a goat bleats indignantly at being tethered too far from the action. You find a spot on a low wall and watch as the threshing begins. It's one of those jobs that looks simple until you try it. A group of men spread the bundles evenly across a hard-packed circle of earth. Then they bring in the animals, donkeys, oxen, even a few patient cows, and drive them slowly around and around over the grain. The sound is rhythmic, hooves crunching, stalks snapping, a low murmur of voices. It's dusty, noisy, and oddly beautiful. You squint against the flying chaff and wonder how anyone survives breathing this much straw dust daily. A woman nearby wraps her scarf over her face and shouts something teasing at one of the men, probably a comment about his technique. He laughs, shouts back, and doubles his efforts. Apparently, competition makes for cleaner grain. You step closer. Under the animal's hooves, the stalks are breaking apart, releasing tiny seeds that sparkle in the sunlight like scattered bronze coins. The farmers work in rhythm, turning the bundles, replacing flattened piles with fresh ones, sweeping aside the loosened grain with reed brooms. It's teamwork in motion, ancient, practiced, efficient. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians first invented this circular threshing floor design or borrowed it from their neighbors in the Levant. Either way, by the time of the Old Kingdom, it had become a permanent part of their agricultural routine. Even the gods were said to watch over the process, especially Renunatit, the cobra-headed goddess of the harvest, whose statues sometimes guarded these fields. You half expect to see one now, glittering eyes watching from the edge of the circle. A young boy hands you a small basket and gestures toward a wooden stick. Apparently, it's your turn. You join in hesitantly, tapping the grain pile in rhythm with the others. It's heavier work than it looks, and the dust immediately finds its way into your mouth, your nose, your ears, everywhere. You cough, earning a few amused smiles. So much for blending in. Still, after a few minutes, you find the rhythm. Swing, lift, tap, breathe. There's something meditative about it, almost hypnotic. You glance up at the oxen circling slowly around you. Their tails flick lazily at flies, their eyes half closed, as if they're dreaming on their feet. It's hard to tell whether they're resigned or wise, probably both. One of them stops abruptly to relieve itself right on the pile of grain. The owner sighs deeply, shakes his head, and mutters something that's almost certainly not a prayer. You can't help but laugh. Civilization might have risen from this soil, but so did manure. When the last of the stalks is broken, the real magic begins. Workers gather the mixture, grain, chaff, and broken straw into large baskets. Then comes the winnowing. They toss the grain high into the air, letting the wind do the sorting. The light chaff drifts away while the heavier seeds fall back to the ground. Over and over, basket after basket, the air fills with a golden blizzard of husks. You watch it swirl in the sun, each flake catching the light before disappearing. It's like snow, if snow came with a free exfoliation treatment for your lungs. A gust picks up suddenly, sending a wave of chaff straight into your face. You cough, eyes watering, and an old man beside you pats your shoulder. "Good wind," he says in accented English, or maybe you just imagine the translation. You nod, pretending to agree, though you can't see a thing. As the winnowing continues, piles of clean grain begin to form, shimmering like little dunes of gold. The villagers cheer quietly. Each pile represents days of labor, and more importantly, another season survived. You notice that some of the women begin gathering the leftover straw and chaff, bundling it for fuel or bedding. Nothing is wasted here. Everything has purpose. A quirky fact: archaeologists have discovered that the ancient Egyptians sometimes used winnowing baskets woven from papyrus fibers coated with mud for extra durability. Some even had hieroglyphic inscriptions carved into their handles, simple blessings like, "May the wind favor the grain." Imagine trusting your livelihood to both craftsmanship and divine breeze. It's humbling and somehow poetic. You wander to the edge of the threshing circle and watch as the last few baskets are tossed. The sunlight fades to amber and the air cools, though the ground still radiates warmth. Children chase each other between the piles, kicking up little clouds of dust that glow in the light. Someone begins playing a simple tune on a flute, a slow, meandering melody that matches the rhythm of the fading day. You sit down again and let yourself drift. The sound of grain falling, the smell of hay and sweat and earth, it's all part of a ritual older than writing itself. In this place, every harvest is both a celebration and a gamble. If the winds blow right, if the flood returns, if the gods are kind, then there will be bread. If not, well, you try not to think about the if not. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the mechanics of wind and weight that made winnowing work, or if they simply learned by patient trial and error. Either way, you can't help but admire their trust in nature, a kind of partnership between human and environment that modern life often forgets. You pick up a handful of grain and let it trickle through your fingers. The kernels are warm from the sun, smooth, and surprisingly heavy. Each one feels like a promise. In a few days, these same grains will be ground to flour, mixed with water, and transformed into bread. You imagine their future selves, round loaves resting on reed trays, steam rising into temple courtyards, offerings piled before the gods. It's strange to hold the beginning of that story in your palm. The workers start singing again, a slower tune this time, something low and winding, more lullaby than work song. The words are lost to time, but the feeling is universal. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion. You feel it too, deep in your bones. A young woman brings out a jug of beer, thick, yeasty, and warm. The farmers gather around her like moths to light. She pours it into clay cups, passing them around with a grin. You take a sip when one is offered to you. It's, well, let's say it's an acquired taste. Half liquid bread, half regret, but refreshing in its own strange way. The ancient Egyptians drank this daily, even children. Safer than river water, they said, and full of energy for another day's work. The sun dips lower, setting the horizon on fire. Shadows stretch long across the threshing floor, and the grain glows one last time before night claims it. Workers begin covering the piles with woven mats to protect them from dew and wandering goats. Slowly, the crowd thins. The animals are led away. The music fades. What remains is silence and the faint crunch of your own footsteps as you walk across the field. Somewhere behind you, a lone ox snorts softly, as if to remind you the work never truly ends. The grain may be separated, but the process continues. Always another step, another transformation. As you make your way back toward the village, the stars begin to emerge, tiny sparks against the deepening blue. The smell of baking bread greets you once again, faint but steady. You smile. It's the same cycle repeating: harvest, thresh, winnow, grind, bake. Life broken down and rebuilt, one grain at a time. Tomorrow, you'll follow those baskets of grain to the grinding stones, where another kind of rhythm waits. The slow scrape of stone against stone, the heartbeat of ancient kitchens. But for now, you walk under the quiet Egyptian sky, the memory of golden dust still clinging to your hair, And think about how even the smallest seed holds the story of an entire civilization. Morning comes quietly again, soft and hazy, as if the sun itself is still waking up. You follow the sound of grinding, the low, rhythmic scrape of stone against stone, and find yourself standing before a small courtyard filled with the steady motion of women kneeling over querns. Each pair of hands moves with the same timeless rhythm, forward, back, forward, back. The air smells faintly of dust and flour, and a soft white haze hangs around the scene like mist. You take a step closer, and the nearest woman glances up briefly, gives a polite nod, and goes right back to work. Her arms move like a tide, slow but powerful. You can see the muscles flexing under her linen sleeves. She doesn't need a gym membership. Grinding grain for hours every day would sculpt anyone. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian bakers were mostly women, enslaved workers, or specialized artisans in larger estates, but one thing's certain, whoever did this job earned their bread, literally. You crouch beside one of the grinding stones to get a better look. The quern itself is a flat slab of sandstone, worn smooth in the center from years of use. The woman holds a rounded handstone about the size of a loaf, pushing it back and forth over the pile of grain. Every few strokes, she pauses to gather the coarser bits back into the middle, then continues. It's repetitive, hypnotic, and strangely satisfying to watch. Want to try? Someone asks. You realize it's the same woman, smiling faintly. You nod, because how hard could it be? Very hard. The handstone is heavier than it looks, and after about 20 seconds, your shoulders start burning. You try to keep the motion steady, but your rhythm falters. The woman laughs softly and gestures for you to move aside. With practiced ease, she resumes, her movements smooth and effortless. See, she says, though her tone is gentle, not mocking. It takes time to learn. You watch as she pours the freshly ground meal into a shallow basket. The flour isn't as fine as what you know from your own kitchen. It's coarse, with bits of bran and husk still mixed in. You pick up a pinch and rub it between your fingers. It's gritty, almost sandy. And indeed, archaeologists who've studied ancient Egyptian teeth say that's exactly what it felt like to eat. Centuries of chewing this kind of bread wore enamel down to the nerve. Imagine trying to smile through that. Still, this flour is life. Every handful represents hours of labor. It's not just food, it's time, energy, devotion. The people grinding now are the silent engines behind every meal, every offering, every feast. You can hear the faint murmur of conversation among them, little jokes, gossip about neighbors, probably complaints about husbands. It sounds like any modern kitchen, just with fewer appliances and more elbow grease. A cool breeze passes through the courtyard, scattering flour dust into the sunlight. It swirls like smoke, catching the light in little golden sparks. You sneeze. Everyone laughs again. One of the women says something that makes the others giggle even harder, no doubt at your expense. You smile and raise your hands in mock surrender. There's a rhythm to this place, not just in the motion of the stones, but in the voices, the pauses, the breaths between effort. You find yourself lulled by it, the repetition working like a lullaby. Even the clack of the querns becomes musical, each scrape a beat in a long, ancient song. A young girl brings over a basket of fresh grain from the threshing fields. She kneels beside her mother and begins helping, her smaller hands struggling to push the stone evenly. Her mother guides her, whispering encouragement. Watching them, you realize this isn't just work, it's inheritance. Skills passed down through generations, each motion teaching patience, endurance, and maybe a bit of humility. Historians still argue whether these grinding courtyards were communal or attached to individual households. Some evidence suggests families shared them, while larger estates had centralized workshops with teams of laborers grinding for hundreds. You imagine the hum of those ancient bakeries, a constant drone of stone on stone, like the heartbeat of civilization itself. In 2014, archaeologists in Amarna found a bakery complex with rows of ancient querns still in place, perfectly aligned like workstations. Each one bore identical grooves from years of repetitive motion. Some of the querns even had small chips missing on one side, likely from workers accidentally striking the edge with their handstones over and over. It's strangely comforting, the thought that human error has always been part of the process. You stand and stretch, brushing flour off your clothes. The dust leaves pale streaks on your skin, and when you lick your lips, you can taste grain and salt and something metallic. Across the yard, an older man carries in sacks of freshly winnowed barley. He sets them down with a sigh and says something about too much sun, not enough beer. You don't need a translation to understand the universal tone of workplace complaints. The women pour more grain onto the stones, keeping the motion going. Their hands and forearms are dusted white, their hair tucked beneath linen scarves. The whole scene feels timeless, one of those moments that could belong to any century. A child's laughter echoes from somewhere nearby, a reminder that life continues even in labor. You kneel again, this time just to listen. The scraping of stone, the murmur of voices, the rustle of baskets. It's all strangely soothing. You imagine yourself back home, lying in bed, listening to a white noise app that mimics this exact sound, the ancient ASMR of civilization. When the grinding slows for a moment, one woman scoops a handful of the coarser bran aside and sets it in a small jar. You ask about it, and she explains it's for the animals, or for stretching out the dough when flour runs low. Nothing wasted. Even imperfection has purpose here. A cat slinks through the courtyard, tail flicking lazily. It pauses beside a basket, sniffs the flour, sneezes dramatically, and saunters off, clearly unimpressed. Everyone laughs again. You're beginning to think ancient Egyptians might have invented cat memes. As the day drifts on, the piles of flour grow, the light shifts, and the rhythm never truly stops. You begin to understand why the Egyptians associated Ma'at, the goddess of balance, with daily order. Every movement here feels balanced, deliberate, nothing rushed, nothing wasted. At last, one of the women stands, stretching her back with a groan. She brushes her hands clean and calls out to someone inside the house. A young man emerges with clay jars filled with water. They pass them around, sharing slow sips. You take a drink too. The water is cool and tastes faintly of river and clay. The relief is immediate. Someone teases, "You'll be strong soon." You grin and shake your head. "Or asleep," you reply, earning another round of laughter. As the sun tilts lower, long shadows stretch across the courtyard. The day's flour is gathered into large sacks, ready to be sifted and stored. The women tidy their work area, stacking handstones neatly, brushing off querns with dry reeds. The quiet pride in their faces is unmistakable. They've turned hard grain into something pliable, something that will soon feed dozens. You glance down at your hands. They're dusted white, the same as theirs. Somehow, it feels like initiation. You've joined, however briefly, in the ancient rhythm of turning earth into nourishment. Beyond the courtyard walls, you can hear the distant bray of donkeys and the low hum of the village preparing for evening. Smoke begins to rise from the ovens again. You know the next stage is coming: mixing, kneading, shaping. But for now, you take one last breath of flour-heavy air and watch the final rays of sunlight spill across the querns. In that moment, The sound of grinding fades into something deeper, a kind of stillness that holds the echo of effort and time. You realize that bread, in all its humble simplicity, is really a story of persistence, of people turning grain, stone, and sweat into life itself. And as you step away from the courtyard, brushing off the dust, the thought lingers. Every loaf begins not with an oven, but with this soft, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of stone and human hands, patient as the Nile. The sun sits higher now, casting the world in that slow golden shimmer that only Egypt seems to know. The grinding courtyard has quieted, the stones are still for the moment. The air is thick with flour dust, and a faint sweetness lingers, the scent of raw grain, stone, and sweat. You follow the women as they carry their baskets of coarse meal inside, toward a shaded corner of the house where the next part of the work awaits. Here, the light changes. The brightness outside fades into a muted glow that filters through a reed mat hung across the doorway. Inside, the air feels cooler, though still heavy with scent. A long table of clay and wood stands in the middle, covered with woven sieves, baskets, and jars. The space hums with quiet purpose. This is where the flour will become something finer, something ready to transform into dough. One woman sets down her basket with a soft thump. "Too coarse," she murmurs, pinching a bit of the meal between her fingers. "It needs to breathe." She gestures for you to come closer, then takes a wide, flat basket woven from date palm fibers. You notice the weave, tight but not perfect, leaving tiny gaps no wider than a grain of sand. She pours a scoop of the ground meal into the basket, lifts it slightly, and begins to shake it in slow, circular motions. A soft rain of pale flour falls through the weave, landing in a bowl beneath. The heavier bits, bran, husk, tiny pebbles, stay behind. It's mesmerizing to watch. The rhythm is different from the grinding, lighter, almost graceful. You take the basket when she offers it, trying to mimic her movement. The sound is soft and dry, like whispering sand. Flour floats into the air, settling on your eyelashes and clothes. You sneeze, which makes everyone laugh again. One of the women jokes that you'll soon be the color of bread dough yourself. The work goes on for hours. You learn that sifting isn't just about texture, it's about purity. Bread, especially if made for the gods or the wealthy, must be clean and uniform. No grit, no husk, no impurities. Every tiny imperfection could offend a divine palate or signal laziness to an overseer. For ordinary families, the flour could be coarser. People accepted the crunch of stone gust as part of life. But in the temples, where offerings were made to Ra or Osiris, the flour had to be as fine as powdered gold. In one corner, an older woman tends to the storage jars. She hums a tune you don't recognize, something slow, half lullaby, half chant. The clay jars stand as tall as her hip, their round bellies marked with faint red paint. She carefully inspects each one for cracks, running her fingers along the cool surface. "You must listen," she tells you, tapping one jar lightly with her knuckles. The sound it makes, a low, clear tone, pleases her. Good jar, dry. You realize that even storage, something as simple as keeping grain or flour, required a kind of wisdom. In this heat, moisture could ruin everything. The Egyptians had mastered the art of preservation. Flour was stored in sealed jars lined with linen or papyrus, sometimes even layered with dried herbs or ashes to deter pests. In wealthier homes or temple granaries, the jars sat on raised stone platforms, safe from damp ground and curious rodents. Outside, you hear the distant rustle of palm trees and the chatter of children playing near the riverbank. Inside, the steady sifting continues, the air turning cloudy with pale dust that catches in the sunlight streaming through small cracks in the wall. You can almost imagine the flour floating upward forever, joining the motes of time itself. You think of what happens next, the bread that will be baked, the meals that will be shared, the offerings placed in tombs. All of it begins here, in this quiet, dusty space. Civilization, in its own way, depends on women shaking baskets. You sit beside the older woman as she seals one of the jars with a clay stopper. She smooths a thin layer of mud around the rim, pressing it gently until it forms a perfect seal. The gesture is precise, deliberate. She murmurs a short prayer under her breath. You catch a few words. May the grain sleep well. It's an odd phrase, but beautiful. In a world where survival depends on what the land gives, even grain becomes sacred, a living thing that must be kept safe until its next purpose. She hands you a small reed brush and shows you how to clean the rim of another jar. The surface feels cool and gritty beneath your fingertips. You can see faint impressions in the clay, fingerprints left by whoever shaped it long ago. Those marks are still there, thousands of years later. Ordinary hands made immortal by daily work. At the far side of the room, a young boy helps carry small bags of sifted flour to a shaded alcove. His job is to record what's stored and what's used. He takes a clay token from a basket, marks it with a stylus, and drops it into a jar labeled with simple hieroglyphs, symbols for grain, bread, or the name of a god. The Egyptians invented writing largely for this purpose, to keep track of food, labor, and trade. The story of language itself is intertwined with the story of flour. You pause for a moment, watching him work. The idea feels almost absurdly poetic, that every loaf of bread could be part of a vast web of symbols, each stroke of a reed pen connected to a meal, a family, a god. The entire civilization runs on this loop of grain and ink. As the afternoon heat deepens, a hush settles over the room. The sifting slows, people stretch their backs and wipe their hands on linen aprons. Someone brings in a jug of cool water mixed with a little date syrup. You share a drink. It tastes faintly sweet and earthy, like the land itself. One of the women gestures to the jars lined along the wall. "These will last months," she says proudly, "even when the river hides." You know what she means. The Nile's yearly flood dictates everything. When it recedes, the stored grain and flour become lifelines. In a way, this small room of jars is a fortress against time. The older woman who sealed the jars earlier steps outside for a moment, then returns holding a small basket of dried reeds. She lays them neatly atop the sealed lids. "For luck," she says, "and for the mice." You raise an eyebrow. She smiles faintly. They don't like the smell. You suspect that's not entirely true, but maybe faith itself is a kind of pest deterrent. The light shifts again, growing softer, redder. Dust floats like gold flakes in the sunset glow. The last of the flour is sifted and stored, and the room grows still. Someone begins to hum again, the same slow tune as before. The others join in quietly. You realize it's a working song, a rhythm to close the day, to mark completion. The sound is low and soothing, a melody that has likely survived for generations without ever being written down. You close your eyes for a moment and just listen. The hum blends with the muffled breeze outside, with the faint sound of the river, with the breath of people who have worked hard but well. The air smells of clay and earth and the faint sweetness of grain. When you open your eyes, the jars stand like sentinels, sturdy, silent, full of potential. Each one contains not just flour, but effort, patience, hope. The Egyptians believed that proper storage was an act of balance, of ma'at, the same cosmic order that governed stars, floods, and kings. Keeping grain safe wasn't just practical, it was moral. You help carry the last sealed jar into the corner, setting it gently among its brothers. For a brief moment, you imagine all the stored grain in Egypt, from the smallest village to the grandest temple granary, a silent network of nourishment stretching along the Nile's endless curve. The thought is both humbling and strangely comforting. Outside, twilight deepens. You step back into the fading light, brushing flour from your arms. The air feels different now, cooler, softer. A few stars blink awake over the horizon. Somewhere nearby, someone lights an oven, and the smell of baking bread drifts through the air. You close your eyes and inhale deeply. Tomorrow, the stored flour will be brought out again, mixed with water and starter, shaped into loaves. The cycle will continue as it always has. But tonight, the grain sleeps well, safe in its jars, resting in the quiet confidence of those who know how to keep life alive. The next morning begins in that soft, dreamlike way that Egyptian dawns often do. The pale sky gradually brightening to honey gold, the low murmur of life stirring before the heat sets in. You can still smell the faint trace of ash from last night's fires, and the flour dust seems to cling to everything, the walls, the air, even your hair. Inside the baking courtyard, the rhythm of the day begins again. This time, instead of grinding or sifting, everyone gathers around the low clay tables. The baskets of fine flour from yesterday's work are waiting. Today is about transformation, about turning powder into something alive. A young woman named Nefru leads the task. She's the kind who talks with her hands, always moving, always smiling with the faint, knowing calm of someone who has done this every day since childhood. She gestures to the large ceramic bowl at her side. Inside, a small lump of what looks like old dough rests under a damp cloth. "This," she says with pride, "this is yesterday's heart." You look closer. It's the starter, sour, bubbly, and faintly tangy. It smells alive. Not unpleasant, just earthy, like wet grain and faint beer. Egyptians didn't use yeast packets, of course. Their leavening came from a portion of old dough mixed into each new batch, kept moist and breathing. It's one of humanity's oldest biological partnerships, people and microbes working side by side. She pours in water from a jug, Nile water, clean and slightly cloudy, and begins to stir the starter until it dissolves. Then she takes a scoop of flour and sprinkles it slowly, letting it fall like pale snow. The movement is deliberate, slow, almost ritualistic. "You don't rush the gods," she murmurs with a wink. The others chuckle softly. You grab a small bowl and begin to copy her. The mixture starts as a slurry, thickening as you work. Your hands sink into the cool paste, and soon you're covered in sticky streaks of dough. It's strangely grounding, this tactile labor. You press, fold, and turn. The air fills with the rhythmic sound of palms against clay, soft squelches, faint laughter. The scent changes as the dough comes together, warm, nutty, a little sour. It smells ancient and comforting, like something humanity has always known how to do. "Not too dry," Nefru warns, sprinkling another splash of water. "Too dry, it cracks. Too wet, it sticks to everything." You look at your own dough, currently sticking to absolutely everything, and she laughs again. "You're learning," she says, her tone indulgent, like a teacher correcting a child's painting with pride rather than frustration. A mainstream fact, historians know that ancient Egyptians used both barley and emmer wheat for their bread. Barley was cheaper and more common, while emmer was prized for its slightly richer flavor. They sometimes mixed the two for balance, economy and taste combined. Some loaves were flavored with honey or dates, others with herbs or even dried fish for the workers' rations. Bread wasn't just one thing, it was a spectrum of textures, flavors, and meanings. The dough grows smoother as you knead, transforming under your fingers. There's something hypnotic about it. The stretch, the fold, the way it slowly begins to resist you. It feels alive. The starter's wild yeasts are waking, feeding, exhaling tiny pockets of air that give the mixture its soft buoyancy. It's like breathing in dough form. You glance around. Every woman has her own rhythm. Press, fold, turn. Some hum quietly, others talk about the harvest, the weather, their children. A few gossip about the priests in the temple nearby, wondering which of them sneaks extra loaves from the offerings. You pretend not to listen, but definitely listen. A quirky tidbit of ancient Egyptian bread residues suggests they sometimes added ground legumes or even crushed limestone to their dough. Not for flavor, but perhaps as a supplement. Or maybe they believed it helped the texture. Historians still argue whether that was intentional or just accidental contamination from the grinding stones. Either way, it's a fun fact that your teeth are very glad doesn't apply to your modern toast. Once the dough reaches the perfect consistency, springy but firm, Nefru pinches off a small piece, rolls it into a ball, and sets it aside. "For tomorrow's heart," she says softly. You realize that every day's bread is born from yesterday's memory. The same living starter might have been passed down for years, even generations. It's like a family heirloom you can eat. The next step is resting. She covers each bowl with linen cloths, dampened slightly to keep the dough moist. "Now," she says, stretching her arms, "we wait for the breath." The breath is fermentation, the invisible process that makes the dough rise. There's no timer, no clock, only instinct. You wait, sitting in the shade, feeling the stillness deepen around you. The air grows warmer, filled with faint smells of earth, river water, and slow transformation. Nearby, a man passes carrying jars of beer. He stops to chat, offering a sip. It's thick, cloudy, and slightly sour, more like liquid bread than a drink. "Same grain," he says proudly, "different destiny." Egyptians brewed beer from the same barley used for bread, often with leftover dough. The two crafts were inseparable, fermentation linking them like siblings. You sip again. It's not bad, though your tongue isn't quite ready for the tang. You can see why workers loved it. Rich in calories, filling, and safer than river water. Some historians even call ancient Egypt the civilization built on beer and bread. And as you sit there, the two smells, rising dough and fermenting brew, blend into one sleepy perfume of life. You glance back at your dough. It's beginning to swell, the surface domed and faintly cracked. Tiny bubbles shimmer beneath the skin. It's subtle but real, life expanding quietly under linen. You touch it lightly with a fingertip, feeling the faint give. Nefru nods approvingly. "It's breathing well," she says. Time passes in that drowsy, timeless way it does in hot places. The courtyard hums softly with flies, with the low murmur of talk, with the creak of baskets shifting under the weight of waiting flour. Someone starts a slow rhythm on a hand drum, just a lazy beat to pass the time. The dough rests. You rest. The whole world seems to exhale. When it's finally ready, Nefru uncovers the bowls. The dough has doubled in size, its surface silky and fragrant. She smiles like someone greeting an old friend. "Now," she says, "we make the shapes." You help divide the dough into smaller lumps, each one rolled, flattened, or twisted into familiar forms. Round loaves, elongated ovals, even small sculpted buns shaped like birds or fish for temple offerings. Children help with the shaping, their small fingers poking dents and patterns into the dough. Someone jokes that the gods prefer loaves with fingerprints. It's astonishing to see the creativity in something so ancient. Bread isn't just sustenance, it's art. Every mark, every fold carries meaning. Some loaves are scored with lines symbolizing the sun's rays. Others have indentations meant to help them bake evenly on hot stones. The simple act of shaping feels sacred, though no one says it aloud. You notice that each loaf carries a small dusting of flour on top, like a final blessing. Nefru steps back, her arms dusted white, and looks at the rows of shaped dough. The courtyard smells alive now, yeasty, warm, anticipatory. You can almost hear the quiet sigh of the loaves as they rest again, rising toward their final form. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians considered bread making primarily a domestic craft or a temple duty. The truth, perhaps, lies in the overlap. For the Egyptians, feeding the gods and feeding the family were not so different. Both acts sustained life, kept balance, honored the order of things. The sun dips lower. Shadows stretch across the ground. The dough sits quietly, covered once more, waiting for its moment in the fire. The air feels charged, almost reverent. You find yourself breathing slower, matching its rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, the faint call of a heron echoes over the river. The loaves rest. The world waits. Tomorrow, the fire will wake. By mid-morning, the courtyard is already alive again. The light is softer here, bouncing off the pale mud walls and making everything glow faintly gold. You can still smell the dough, warm, yeasty, sweet, and the faint hum of voices floats through the air like birdsong. Yesterday's kneading has left your arms pleasantly sore, but there's no rest day in this rhythm. Today, the dough becomes beauty. You sit beside Nefru again, watching as she sprinkles a light layer of flour across the clay work table. The dust drifts like morning fog before settling in thin, even layers. Now we give them faces, she says simply, gesturing toward the resting loaves under linen covers. She pulls one cloth aside, and you can't help but marvel. The dough has risen softly, swelling like sleeping cats. The smell, mildly sour, faintly nutty, wraps around you like comfort itself. She handles each loaf gently, pressing her palm against its surface, then lifting it to the light, as though reading something invisible within it. You follow her lead. The dough yields under your fingers, elastic, alive, faintly cool. It's strange to think that these small, pale rounds will soon feed a family, a worker, maybe even a priest. The Egyptians treated their bread with a kind of affection, half reverence, half routine. Every loaf has a place, Nefru says, placing one carefully onto a woven mat. Some go to the gods, some to the builders, some to the little ones. She nods toward a corner where a child sits cross-legged, rolling tiny lumps of dough into miniature shapes, small fish, flowers, birds. For the tombs, she explains, offerings that last longer than we do. You glance at the child's work, small, slightly lopsided creations that somehow seem perfect. It's touching to think that even the smallest hands here help build eternity. A mainstream fact, archaeologists have discovered that ancient Egyptians baked hundreds of different bread shapes, cones, discs, spirals, even pyramid-like loaves. Some were purely functional, easy to bake and store, while others were intricate, meant for feasts or burial offerings. A single tomb might contain models or real loaves representing all the varieties of daily life. In a way, bread was their most democratic art form. Everyone had access to it, but its form reflected who you were. Nefru dips her fingers in oil and smooths the top of a loaf. The sheen it leaves catches the sunlight, turning golden. The gods like shine, she says with a small smirk, and so do we. You pick up a tool, a small reed comb, and try to make markings across the surface. The lines are uneven, but Nefru doesn't correct you. It's not about perfect, she says. It's about care. That word lingers. Care. the quiet attention that turns daily labor into ritual. Around the courtyard, the others are shaping too. One woman rolls out long cylinders of dough, then coils them like snakes. Another presses the flat edge of a seashell into her loaves, leaving delicate fan-like patterns. You try the same, pressing a shell gently into the soft surface. It leaves behind a perfect imprint, a small fossil of this moment. A light breeze drifts through the courtyard, carrying the scent of baking from a nearby house. Someone's breakfast bread already in the oven. The air feels alive with possibility. A quirky tidbit: in some temples, bakers shaped loaves into symbolic figures, tiny cattle, fish, even lotus blossoms, to represent abundance. These offerings weren't just snacks for the gods, they were prayers in edible form. One ancient recipe even called for loaves shaped like human limbs, thought to restore health to the corresponding part of a person's body. Imagine biting into a doughy leg because your ankle hurts. Somehow both weird and oddly poetic. The shaping continues. You press, fold, and pattern your loaves with more confidence now. Every gesture feels rhythmic, like part of a larger song you can't quite hear but somehow remember. Nefru hums softly as she works, a tune you've begun to recognize. It sounds like the Nile itself would hum if it could. She stops occasionally to sprinkle flour or oil across the tops to prevent sticking. The flour is like snow, she says absently. It keeps the loaves from clinging too hard to the world. You wonder if that's also true of people. A shadow passes overhead, a hawk gliding lazily against the sun. The courtyard pauses for a moment, everyone looking up. Hawks are sacred here, symbols of Horus, protector of kings. Someone murmurs a short blessing before returning to the dough. The balance of reverence and work is seamless. Everything matters, but nothing needs ceremony. Soon, the tables are filled with shaped loaves, each one unique. Round, oblong, spiral, flat, scored, ridged. The sight of them all together, rows and rows of small, pale sculptures, fills you with quiet awe. It's not just food, it's intention made visible. Nefru points out a few of the finer loaves, those with intricate designs or unusual patterns. These go to the overseer's store, she says. He'll send them to the temple kitchens. Then she picks up a few of the smaller ones, brushing them lightly with honey and crushed sesame. These are for the workers, sweet bread for long days. You help carry the trays to a shaded area where they'll rest one last time before baking. The smell intensifies, fermented, faintly sweet, impossibly comforting. You can already imagine how they'll taste. Crispy on the outside, soft and airy inside. Historians still argue whether Egyptians baked their bread mostly in open ovens or domed clay molds. Some evidence points to tall, cone-shaped molds placed directly in embers, while others suggest flat communal ovens lined with hot stones. Either way, the principle was the same: heat, patience, and a touch of luck. Bread was as much alchemy as it was cooking. You sit back and take in the scene. The sunlight slanting across the loaves, the low hum of voices, the soft clatter of bowls and jars. The courtyard feels timeless. You could blink and believe it's 1,000 years later or earlier, and it would look exactly the same. One of the boys, cheeky as ever, tries to sneak a piece of raw dough into his mouth. Nefru catches him mid-bite and flicks flour at his nose. Patience, she says. The gods haven't finished their part yet. Everyone laughs, and for a moment, the whole courtyard feels like a family kitchen. You notice something small but beautiful, how every hand leaves a different mark on the dough. Some press lightly, leaving smooth curves. Others work harder, leaving deep lines. Each loaf, even the simplest, carries its maker's signature, invisible but real. When they bake, those marks will remain, just as fingerprints do on time itself. The work slows as the morning heat deepens. The final loaves are shaped, brushed, and set aside. Nefru wipes her hands on her apron and exhales deeply. "The hardest part," she says with mock gravity, "is waiting." You smile, glancing at the resting dough. "I think the dough's better at patience than we are." She grins. "That's why it always rises." It's a simple line, but it lands softly, like a proverb you'll remember. You take a moment to look around again. The flour dust floating like gold in the light. The smell of yeast and earth mingling in the warm air. The faint laughter still echoing between the mud walls. The Egyptians might not have had ovens with thermostats or kitchen timers, but they had something deeper, an unshakable sense of rhythm. Bread making here isn't separate from life. It is life. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds blend together. The distant splash of river water, the hum of insects, the slow breathing of rising dough. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, a temple bell rings faintly, marking the passage of another hour. The loaves rest quietly, ready for the fire. The bakers stretch, wipe their hands, and share a look that says they've done their part. Now it's time for the heat to do the rest. The sun is higher now, climbing steadily over the flat rooftops. Its warmth seeps into the mud brick walls, making them glow as though lit from within. The courtyard is quieter, emptied of chatter and movement. Even the children have been sent to fetch water or fan the ovens. Only the steady rustle of the Nile breeze remains, drifting through the air like a sigh. Today is baking day. Nefru stands near the largest oven, a round, dome-shaped structure made of hardened clay, its sides darkened by years of smoke and flame. The smell around it is unmistakable. The rich scent of yesterday's ashes mingled with faint sweetness from past loaves. The oven breathes heat, even when still, like an animal at rest. "Come," she says softly, her voice steady. "It's time to wake it." You follow her to the kiln's mouth, where a pile of dry reeds and dung cakes waits. She crouches and begins to feed the kindling inside. Sparks catch, smoke coils upward, and soon a small orange glow blooms in the shadows. The oven hums faintly as the fire deepens, an ancient living sound. This is how it has always been done. No chimneys, no metal racks, no neat dials or thermometers. Just instinct and memory. The bakers of Egypt have passed down this knowledge through generations. How to read the color of the smoke, how to listen to the hum of burning air, how to know by scent when the oven is ready. Nefru narrows her eyes at the flames. "Too much smoke and the loaves taste bitter," she murmurs. "Too little and they stay pale." She pokes the fire again, adjusting with calm precision. Bread is patient, but the fire is not. The others join in, some bringing dry straw, others fanning the flames with woven mats. The smoke thickens for a moment, then clears, leaving behind a warm, glowing red within the oven's belly. The heat radiates outward, shimmering the air. You can feel it on your skin even from several steps away. It's not unpleasant, just powerful, steady, inevitable. The kind of heat that turns soft dough into nourishment. Archaeologists have found that ancient Egyptian ovens were often built in communal courtyards like this one. They were shaped like beehives or cones, with a narrow top to vent smoke and a wide base for the fire. Bakers would line the inner walls with smooth clay, sometimes coated in sand to prevent sticking. Some loaves were slapped directly onto the sides of the hot interior, like modern naan. Others were baked in molds that stood in the coals. There's something intimate about this process. Each loaf born not from a single hand, but from a shared rhythm of labor, heat, and faith. Nefru wipes her forehead with the back of her arm and gestures to the loaves waiting on the table. "We'll start with the ones for the temple," she says. "They should meet the fire first." You lift one gently. It's light and delicate, the dough slightly tacky to the touch. Its surface bears the pattern you pressed into it earlier, a small spiral now faintly dry and firm. You carry it to the oven, heart beating faster than it should. "Lay it here," Nefru instructs, painting toward the smooth curve of the oven's interior. The heat bites your skin, and for a second, instinct tells you to pull back. But you steady your hands and press the loaf against the wall. It sticks, just barely, then clings as though it belongs there. "Good," Nefru says. "Now we wait." That word again, wait. In Egypt, everything seems to revolve around it. The rising of dough, the flooding of the Nile, the coming of the harvest, the turning of stars. Waiting isn't idleness here, it's trust. You step back and watch as more loaves are added, rows of them pressed along the oven's inner wall like suns rising in miniature. Their pale surfaces begin to shift almost immediately, swelling, blistering slightly. A faint hiss fills the air. The smell is intoxicating, sweet, smoky, and deeply earthy all at once. The scent of grain transformed. For a moment, time softens. The courtyard fades into stillness, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire. You can hear the faint murmur of water somewhere beyond the wall, perhaps from a jar being filled or from the slow lap of the river against its bank. The light flickers across Nefru's face as she leans toward the oven, eyes narrowed in concentration. She could be a priestess at an altar, tending to a sacred flame. And, in a way, she is. Bread wasn't merely food to the Egyptians. It was divine substance, the very thing that linked humanity and the gods. In temple rituals, priests offered bread daily to the deities, and afterward, those same loaves were distributed among the temple workers. Offerings were not destroyed, but shared, a beautiful economy of reverence and survival. You remember what one of the younger bakers said yesterday while shaping loaves? The gods like shine. Now you understand. Bread, golden and warm, was a reflection of the sun itself, Ra's own daily rebirth. A few minutes pass. Nefru reaches into the oven with a long stick, tapping one loaf gently. "Listen," she says. You lean close. The sound is hollow, crisp, a quiet knock from within. That's how you know it's ready. She uses the stick to pry it loose. The loaf falls softly into a cloth-lined basket, steaming, fragrant, and impossibly beautiful. Its surface gleams faintly where oil brushed over it before baking. A perfect balance of crust and softness. You break off a small corner, careful not to burn yourself. The texture surprises you. It's dense, chewy, but full of life. Slightly sour, slightly sweet, a hint of smoke at the edge. You taste the fields, the river, the sun. You taste labor itself. "Good," Nefru says with a nod. "You've baked your first loaf." It feels like more than that. It feels like you've joined something ancient. She laughs softly when she sees your face. You should see the faces of the new boys when they first taste their bread. They always look like they've eaten the Nile. The laughter spreads, low and warm. One of the older men fans the fire gently to keep it alive. More loaves are added, more taken out, more baskets filled. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Shape, place, wait, listen, remove. As the morning slips into afternoon, the courtyard fills with rows of cooling loaves. The air shimmers with heat, and the ground smells of ash and grain. A few flies buzz lazily, but are brushed away with ease. Every baker moves with unspoken coordination. Someone hums again, maybe the same river song from yesterday. and soon others join in, quietly. The sound mingles with the crackle of the fire. You find yourself humming too, without even realizing it. There's a kind of peace that comes from doing the same thing your ancestors did, exactly the same way, for thousands of years. The gestures are unchanged, the tools nearly identical. The bread that will feed someone tonight could have fed someone just like you 4,000 years ago. When the last batch is done, Nefru sits down heavily, stretching her arms. "The fire can rest," she says, and someone covers the oven's mouth with a stone slab. The heat lingers in the air, like a memory. The bakers gather around the baskets, their work gleaming softly in the afternoon light. Some loaves are divided and stacked in reed trays, others wrapped for the temple, and a few, golden, perfect, fragrant, are set aside for the household meal. Nefru hands you one of these and nods. "Eat." You tear off a piece and share it with her. The crust crackles and steam escapes, curling upward into the sunlight. It tastes different when eaten here, under this sky, among these people. Not just bread, but story. Not just food, but time, folded and baked into form. For a long while, no one speaks. There's no need to. The courtyard is filled with the sound of chewing, sighing, laughter, the small music of satisfaction. When you finally lean back against the wall, the scent of baked grains still heavy around you, Nefru speaks again, softly, almost to herself. "The bread feeds the body," she says, "but the making feeds the soul." You look at her, at the loaves, at the faint wisp of smoke curling into the bright Egyptian sky. You understand. The oven cools, the baskets fill, and the ancient day continues, unhurried, perfect in its rhythm. Another quiet hymn of heat, patience, and creation. By the late afternoon, the oven has quieted, its glowing embers reduced to gentle warmth. The courtyard smells faintly of smoke and warm grain, a comforting, enveloping scent that seems to linger in your hair and on your clothes. The heat of the day has softened into a gentle warmth, brushing your skin with the kind of tired satisfaction that follows sustained, mindful labor. Nefru calls everyone to attention. The loaves must cool before they can be handled properly. You carry a basket of steaming bread to a shaded reed mat, placing it carefully on the woven surface. The crusts hiss faintly as the air meets their hot surfaces, releasing a perfume that is both nutty and sweet. You run your fingers lightly over a golden dome, feeling the heat still trapped inside, the promise of soft, yielding crumb beneath. It's not a fast process. Bread in ancient Egypt needed patience, even after baking. Too soon, and it might become misshapen or sweat inside its own crust. Too late, and it would begin to dry out, losing some of its tender sweetness. You notice how the women gently rotate each loaf, exposing all sides to the breeze, almost as if coaxing them to perfection. Some mainstream facts float through your mind. In villages, cooled loaves were stored in baskets lined with linen or mats, sometimes covered with palm leaves. In wealthier households or temples, clay jars or wooden boxes were used to protect the bread from pests, sun, and moisture. The Egyptians understood preservation not as a convenience, but as necessity. Every crumb mattered. Every loaf represented hours of labor and the survival of the household. As the loaves cool, Nefru assigns distribution. Some will be taken to the temple for offerings. Others will feed the household. And still more will travel with workers in the fields or the construction sites. You follow her as she selects loaves for each purpose, placing them carefully into woven baskets. The smallest are wrapped in clean linen for children or as ritual gifts. Their shapes often marked with simple designs or symbols. Every loaf has a path, Nefru explains, as if the bread itself could speak. Some travel far, some stay home, some go to the gods, but all are needed. The idea strikes you deeply. Bread is not just sustenance, it is a form of currency, a symbol of life and labor, a medium that binds communities together. You can imagine the bakers of old, thousands of years ago, carefully distributing loaves along the Nile, each piece carrying the sweat, skill, and hope of its maker. In some tombs, archaeologists have discovered miniature models of bakery carts and loaves, suggesting that even the distribution of bread was a ritualized act. It wasn't simply about feeding people, it was about demonstrating care, balance, and social order. Historians still argue whether these models represented real-life practice or symbolic ideals, but either way, it highlights how central bread was to daily and spiritual life. You lift a basket filled with flattened ovals, golden and soft beneath the linen. The weight is deceptively light, yet it carries the memory of hours of grinding, kneading, shaping, and baking. You pass the basket to a young boy, who balances it carefully on his hip, his small fingers clutching the handles. He walks toward the temple gate, eyes wide with responsibility and pride. The sun tilts lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Nefru gestures for you to carry some of the larger, heavier loaves to a nearby storage area. The jars and bins are lined with reeds and straw, each one labeled with simple hieroglyphs or tied with strips of linen. You set each loaf gently inside, making sure none touch too closely so that the crust remains crisp and intact. You pause for a moment, brushing your hands on your linen apron, and watch the courtyard come alive with movement again. Children scurry with baskets, women adjust coverings, and men prepare to take loads down to the river or into the fields. The rhythm is unbroken, a soft, flowing dance of work and purpose. The cooling loaves hiss faintly, releasing the last of their trapped warmth into the air. You notice how the thin veil of steam catches the sunlight, forming tiny glimmering clouds above each basket. It's beautiful in a quiet, understated way, like watching dust motes float through a sunbeam or seeing ripples across a still river. A mainstream fact you recall: many of the finer loaves, particularly those destined for temple offerings, were decorated with symbols representing the gods, celestial bodies, or aspects of daily life. This wasn't mere embellishment, it was belief rendered edible. The act of offering decorated bread reinforced societal hierarchy, devotion, and the understanding that food itself could carry spiritual weight. Some loaves are left plain, destined for the hands of laborers. Others bear patterns carefully scored with a reed tool or pressed with a stamp. You find yourself drawn to a small, intricately patterned spiral, its ridges catching the fading sunlight. It reminds you that even the simplest daily tasks, shaping a loaf, can become art if approached with care and intention. The distribution continues into early evening. Each person has a role. Someone carries baskets to waiting boats along the Nile. Another loads a donkey cart bound for the marketplace, while others deliver small bundles to neighboring homes. The air is rich with the mingling smells of baking, earth, river water, and the faint tang of yeast. A quirky detail floats through your thoughts. In some records, bakers included small tokens of honey or seeds within certain loaves, meant to bring luck or health to the recipient. Historians still argue whether these were widespread customs or isolated regional practices, but the idea that bread could carry blessing as well as nutrition feels comforting. You follow a young woman carrying 2 baskets, balancing them carefully. She hums softly, a tune you've heard before, a gentle, lilting rhythm that seems to echo the movement of the river. The melody threads through the courtyard, connecting everyone in a shared moment of quiet purpose. Even the animals notice the ritual. A cat pads silently along the walls, eyes half closed, sniffing at the edges of the baskets, but never daring to touch the loaves. The occasional donkey brays softly, echoing against the mud brick walls, a reminder of the wider world beyond this small courtyard. As the sun dips behind distant hills, the courtyard begins to empty. Most loaves have been distributed or stored. A few remain in baskets, cooling slowly, still warm to the touch, their scent lingering in the heavy evening air. You take a deep breath, letting the aroma settle in your chest. It's grounding, almost meditative. The women begin tidying the area, brushing flour from tables, stacking baskets, and carrying unused tools to the small storeroom. Nefru stands near the doorway, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the reed mat. She smiles softly, her hands resting lightly on a basket of bread. "Every loaf has a story," she says quietly. "Some go far, some stay close. All are remembered." The weight of her words settles over you, slow and deliberate. Bread isn't just food here, it's memory, history, and connection. Every step from grain to loaf carries time itself. Finally, the courtyard is still. You lean back against the wall, brushing flour dust from your hands. The last cooling loaves sit in baskets, golden and soft, their aroma blending with the fading light. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Nile murmurs softly. And for a moment, you understand fully. The work isn't done when the loaf leaves the oven. Its story continues, carried by hands, mouths, and memories, stretching across households, temples, and generations. The next morning brings a gentle haze over the Nile, softening the light and making the mud brick houses glow like honey. You step into the courtyard and immediately notice the familiar scent of flour and damp clay. The air feels thick but comforting, carrying the faint whisper of yesterday's baking. Today, Nefru wants to show you something equally essential to bread making: the tools and techniques that turn raw grain into sustenance and that have remained almost unchanged for centuries. She begins with the querns, the hand-operated grinding stones that have become almost like old friends here. Each quern consists of two circular stones, a lower, stationary one, and an upper stone with a central hole for pouring grain. You kneel beside her as she demonstrates, pouring a handful of emmer wheat into the upper stone and beginning the slow circular motion that crushes the grain into coarse meal. The friction is mesmerizing. Tiny fragments of husk and kernel crumble under your fingers as you rotate the upper stone. The rhythmic sound, grinding, scraping, whispering, is meditative, and you find your mind slowing to match it. Each rotation feels ancient, almost sacred. Querns were widely used in ancient Egypt for thousands of years, allowing households to process enough grain for daily bread. Archaeologists have found examples in both small homes and large temple complexes, some intricately carved with hieroglyphs or decorative motifs. They weren't just functional, they were objects of quiet craftsmanship, enduring through generations. Nefru hands you a small, flat wooden spatula, showing how it's used to scrape the freshly ground meal from the stone's surface. The tool is worn smooth from centuries of contact, the wood faintly darkened by oil and flour. You run your fingers along it, feeling the subtle grooves left by countless hands. It's astonishing to think that each household's quern and spatula carries the imprint of all who used them before: workers, children, bakers, and perhaps even priests. Next, she introduces the sieves. Made from reeds woven tightly together, the baskets are used to separate fine flour from the coarser husks. You dip your hand into one and lift the meal, letting it fall slowly back into a bowl. The dust rises like mist, soft and pale, and you watch as it settles. There's an almost magical quality to this simple action. The transformation from rough grain to soft, fine flour is tangible, yet quiet, almost invisible. A quirky tidbit, Some archaeologists believe the Egyptians may have occasionally added ground shells, small stones, or even sand to their dough. Some scholars argue this was intentional to improve texture or shelf life. Others suggest it was merely contamination from the grinding process. Either way, it's a reminder that even the simplest food preparation can carry secrets and mysteries centuries later. As you sift, Nefru moves to the kneading table, a low clay slab polished smooth by countless loaves. She gestures for you to join her. With the finely sifted flour, water, and starter, she begins to demonstrate kneading techniques. Press, fold, turn, repeat. Your hands sink into the sticky mass, pulling and pressing. The dough resists and yields in a hypnotic rhythm. "Notice the feel," she murmurs. "You must listen to the dough." The words feel strange at first. Dough can't speak, can it? Yet as your fingers press and turn, you begin to understand. The texture, the elasticity, the subtle springiness, these are cues. Too dry and the dough cracks. Too wet and it clings endlessly. You learn to adjust by touch, by feel alone, responding to the bread's subtle demands. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians taught kneading formally or whether it was passed down informally through observation and imitation. Either way, the skill was essential, and mastery often defined who could produce bread of high quality. Even small households relied on intuition honed through years of hands-on work. Next comes shaping. Nefru shows you how to use simple tools, flat reeds, shells, and even your fingers. Patterns aren't merely decorative, they serve practical purposes. Scoring the dough allows it to expand evenly in the heat, while indentations help identify the type of grain used or the intended recipient. A loaf for temple offerings may be decorated differently from one destined for field workers. You try shaping a small spiral, pressing gently with your fingertips. It's lopsided, but Nefru smiles. "Perfect," she says. Every hand leaves a story. A breeze drifts through the courtyard, carrying the scent of fresh water and distant river reeds. You pause for a moment, feeling the rhythm of labor, the soft continuity of centuries. Each movement, the grinding, sifting, kneading, shaping, is part of a chain connecting past and present. You are not merely baking, you are participating in a tradition that transcends time. Nefru now introduces molds, simple clay forms slightly conical or cylindrical. Some loaves, especially those meant for ceremonial use, are shaped inside these molds to create uniformity or to replicate symbolic shapes like animals or flowers. You press dough into a small mold, feeling the edges yield to your fingers. The resulting shape is precise yet fragile, ready to rise and transform in the oven. You notice small flour lines left by previous batches, faint as fingerprints. These marks are reminders that this space has been alive for centuries with the same sounds, smells, and motions. The women smile knowingly, aware of the continuity, but not needing to speak it aloud. In some regions, bakers would use small reeds or sticks to create tiny holes in the dough, which acted like vents to control baking. Others would press grains of spelt, barley, or sesame onto the surface, both for flavor and as a signature of sorts. Historians still debate whether this was primarily practical, aesthetic, or symbolic, but either way, it adds a layer of personality to each loaf. By midday, you have worked through the entire sequence: grinding, sifting, kneading, shaping, and preparing molds. Your hands are dusted with flour, your arms pleasantly tired, and your mind has slowed to match the rhythm of labor. Nefru steps back, watching the collection of prepared loaves. "Tools and technique," she says softly, "make the bread, but care makes it lasting." The phrase lingers. You realize that even in a world without modern conveniences, Knowledge and precision, combined with patience and attention, could produce sustenance that nourished both body and community. The Egyptians did not just make bread, they crafted life itself, one loaf at a time. As the afternoon sun tilts, the courtyard fills with shadows of reeds and walls, softening the harsh lines of the day. You glance at the spread of tools and loaves around you and feel a quiet awe. Each item, each motion, each pattern connects past to present, earth to hand, and effort to reward. The corns, the sieves, the molds, and the simple tools all hum with silent stories, waiting for the next hands to pass them forward. You realize that these techniques, so deceptively simple, are the backbone of Egyptian daily life, an enduring testament to human ingenuity, patience, and the quiet magic of creating something that lasts. You step back, brushing flour from your hands and arms, taking in the smell of dust, grain, and warmth. The loaves are ready for the final steps: fire, cooling, and distribution. But for now, in this moment, you feel grounded in the continuity of work and care, intimately connected to hands that shaped dough thousands of years before. The courtyard hums softly with life. The Nile glimmers in the distance, and all around, the ancient tools wait, patient and knowing, ready for another day of transformation. The following morning, the courtyard wakes slowly, filtered sunlight brushing over the mud brick walls, illuminating faint swirls of dust and flour in the air. You step in, still carrying the faint scent of yesterday's loaves clinging to your clothes. Today, Nefru focuses on one of the most magical and invisible aspects of bread making: fermentation, the dance of yeast, time, and flavor that gives life to dough. You approach the low clay table where she has set out several bowls of starter. The mixture is pale, bubbly, and faintly sour, with a smell somewhere between sweet grain and old orchard. "This," she whispers, "is the soul of the bread." You glance at the bowls, hesitant at first. Tiny bubbles rise and pop on the surface. The starter seems alive in a way that is almost uncanny. Egyptians did not have commercial yeast packets, of course. The leavening came from a portion of old dough, carefully maintained and nurtured over time. This starter, levain in modern terms, is like a living memory of every loaf that came before, passed down from one batch to the next. Archaeologists have discovered traces of natural yeast in pottery fragments from ancient Egypt, dating back thousands of years. These wild yeasts, often Saccharomyces cerevisiae, fermented the dough slowly, creating both flavor and texture. Every household had its own microflora, giving each loaf a unique taste profile. Historians still argue whether certain flours were deliberately inoculated or simply left to nature, but either way, the results were consistent and reliable. Nefru scoops a bit of starter into a larger bowl and adds water, stirring gently until it dissolves. The mixture becomes a pale, viscous slurry. Then comes the flour, slowly sprinkled in, a little at a time, each dusting absorbed by the living dough. You knead gently, feeling the elasticity grow with each fold. Already you can sense the subtle warmth building beneath your fingers, a quiet sign that the yeast is waking, feeding, and preparing to transform the mixture into something far greater than the sum of its parts. The process is meditative. You press, fold, and turn, listening to the faint hiss and gurgle of tiny bubbles forming and collapsing beneath the surface. There is an almost hypnotic rhythm to it, one that slows your breathing and sharpens your awareness. You are not simply making bread, you are listening to life unfold in slow motion. A quirky tidbit floats to your mind. Recent studies suggest that some ancient bakers might have intentionally introduced fruit or grape must into their starters to kickstart fermentation. It wasn't sweetness for flavor alone, it was a microbial boost, giving the dough a lively, tangy personality. You laugh softly to yourself, imagining Egyptians adding grapes to dough and calling it a party starter. The starter is allowed to rest in a warm corner of the courtyard, lightly covered with linen to protect it from dust and pests. Nefru explains that the dough is happiest when it feels safe and undisturbed. You watch as the mixture slowly begins to rise, the bubbles becoming more pronounced, the aroma richer, almost intoxicating. Historians still argue whether bakers checked the readiness of dough by visual cues, smell, or touch, or by a combination of all three. Some experimental bakers today rely on poking the dough and gauging elasticity. Others rely on intuition honed over years. You try a gentle poke, and the dough bounces back, soft yet resilient, promising a light, airy loaf. Next, Nefru guides you to a slightly larger batch, demonstrating how to fold the dough over itself repeatedly, a technique that traps air and strengthens gluten networks. With each fold, you feel the dough become more cohesive, more structured, yet still alive, almost quivering under your hands. The transformation is remarkable. What began as a sticky, shapeless mass is now smooth, pliable, and full of promise. She sprinkles in small grains of barley for texture and flavor. You notice how the subtle addition changes not only the appearance, but also the aroma. Bread was never just fuel in ancient Egypt. It carried nuance, complexity, and sometimes even personality. Bakers adjusted ingredients to taste, texture, and sometimes ritual requirements. The sour tang of fermentation was prized, though the degree varied depending on who would eat the bread. The courtyard is quiet now, except for the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clatter of pottery. You pause to inhale deeply, letting the scent of rising dough fill your senses. It's warm, comforting, and strangely intimate, a smell that seems to carry centuries of human labor and care. You can imagine other hands, long ago, pressing, folding, and breathing life into grain in the same gentle rhythm. A few of the smaller loaves are shaped directly from starter-enriched dough, destined for temple offerings. Nefru presses them lightly into small molds, creating intricate designs. You realize that fermentation is not merely chemical, it is creative, a partnership between humans and microbes that yields both sustenance and beauty. A quirky detail lingers. Some experimental archaeologists suggest that ancient bakers occasionally used sourdough from beer residues as a starter. In essence, part of the bread was pre-fermented in the same vessels that produced beer, linking two ancient staples in one microbial symphony. Historians still debate whether this was deliberate or accidental, but the concept seems charmingly practical. As the day progresses, the courtyard warms. The sunlight filters in at a slant, dust motes floating lazily, mixing with the faint swirl of flour. The dough continues its quiet transformation, swelling, softening, becoming fragrant. You watch closely, fascinated by the subtle signs. A slight jiggle when tapped, the gentle give when poked, the faint scent shift towards sweet and nutty. You take a small pinch of dough and roll it between your fingers. It's cool yet springy, alive in your hands. Nefru smiles knowingly. The yeast is your partner, she says. It's subtle, patient, and a little unpredictable. Treat it well, and it will reward you. The metaphor isn't lost on you. Yeast, time, and attention combine to create flavor, texture, and life. You are witnessing the invisible processes that transform raw ingredients into something sustaining, sacred, and enduring. By late afternoon, the fermentation is nearly complete. The dough is aromatic, elastic, and soft yet structured. Nefru gathers the bowls, brushing a light layer of flour over the surface to prevent sticking. She gestures toward the waiting oven, now cooled from yesterday's fire, ready to receive its next generation of loaves. The courtyard hums softly, almost reverently. Every loaf, every bubble, every fold carries intention. You realize that the act of letting dough ferment is as much about patience as skill, a quiet discipline of waiting, observing, and trusting. Historians still argue whether ancient bakers considered fermentation purely practical or infused it with spiritual significance. Given the centrality of bread in both diet and ritual, it's easy to imagine both truths coexisting. Bread was nourishment for body and spirit, and the yeast that breathed life into dough became a quiet partner in that sacred task. You run your fingers lightly across a bowl of dough one last time, feeling the energy stored within. Soon, it will be shaped, baked, and distributed. But for now, it is enough to witness, to touch, to inhale. Fermentation is the hidden heartbeat of the bread, a gentle pulse beneath the surface that has carried civilizations forward one loaf at a time. The sun dips lower, shadows stretching long across the courtyard. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the smell of yeast, flour, and warm dough fill your senses. The world seems softened, slowed, and gently alive in a way that only patience and care can create. The starter bubbles faintly, rising and falling, a reminder of the invisible dance that sustains life and flavor alike. You realize that in this quiet courtyard, among simple tools, patient hands, and living dough, you are not merely learning how to bake, you are touching history itself. The morning sun stretches over the Nile, spilling golden light across the courtyard and making the mud brick walls glow warmly. You step inside and feel the familiar scent of flour and warm dough mingling with the faint aroma of river reeds. Today, Nefru guides you not only through bread making, but also through the quiet rituals that surround it, the subtle ways baking intersects with daily life and domestic rhythm in ancient Egypt. She gestures toward a small basin filled with water. "Clean hands first," she says gently. In Egyptian households, cleanliness wasn't just practical, it carried ritual significance. Before kneading or shaping bread, hands were washed carefully, often with water scented by crushed herbs. You dip your fingers, feeling the cool flow over your skin, and watch Nefru do the same. The water glints in the morning light, almost like liquid silver, and you catch a faint whiff of mint she has crushed into it. Around the courtyard, life unfolds quietly. A young boy sweeps the floor with a bundle of reeds, sending faint clouds of dust floating into the sunlight. A woman arranges reeds for cooling trays, her movements smooth and deliberate. In the corner, a child plays with a small clay figurine, mimicking the shaping of loaves you practiced yesterday. These daily acts, sweeping, arranging, playing, are small rituals that prepare the household for productive work, maintaining balance and order. You notice how Nefru arranges the prepared dough on reed mats. Each loaf has its place, spaced evenly to allow air circulation. The act is precise, almost meditative. She hums softly, a tune that feels as old as the river itself, threading through the courtyard and giving rhythm to the work. In many Egyptian households, bread making was integrated into domestic routines, often carried out in communal courtyards. Women usually oversaw the process, sometimes aided by children or apprentices. These courtyards doubled as social and productive spaces, where food preparation, laundry, and crafts intersected. Historians still argue whether these roles were strictly gendered or more flexible in certain regions, but evidence shows bread making was central to family life and household economy. Nefru gestures toward a small offering table set against the wall. Tiny loaves, carefully shaped and decorated, rest there, ready to honor the gods. "Before we eat, some bread must go to the gods," she explains softly. Even simple households maintained these rituals. A small portion of the day's bread was offered to deities or ancestral spirits, acknowledging that life itself was a gift. You watch her place a few spiraled loaves delicately on the table, the sunlight catching their pale, smooth surfaces. The scent of freshly ground flour drifts through the air as Nefru kneads a new batch of dough. Her movements are fluid, almost hypnotic. She folds and presses, coaxing life into the mass with each deliberate gesture. You knead alongside her, feeling the elastic texture yield under your fingers. Each motion carries both utility and ceremony, as though the simple act of shaping dough is itself a form of devotion. Quirky tidbit: some households placed small amulets or grains of incense into their dough before baking, believing it would protect the family or bring prosperity. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or more symbolic, but they illustrate how intimately bread was woven into the spiritual and domestic life of Egyptians. Imagine biting into a loaf and finding a tiny charm hidden inside. It's whimsical, protective, and deeply human. You step back for a moment, observing the rhythm of the courtyard. Children carry small trays of dough. Women exchange quiet conversation, and men move with baskets toward storage areas or temple paths. Every movement is purposeful, a dance of care and efficiency. Even the animals are attuned. Cats pad silently among the baskets, dogs stretch in the sunlight, and a donkey waits patiently near the river's edge for its load of flour sacks. Nefru shows you a series of subtle signals used to coordinate the household. A raised hand might indicate a batch is ready. A soft whistle calls children to attention. A gentle tap on the clay oven signals that the fire is at its peak. These unspoken cues maintain harmony, ensuring that labor and ritual coexist without conflict. The discussion shifts to meal preparation. Bread is the backbone of daily sustenance, paired with vegetables, fish, or occasionally meat. You break a small piece of yesterday's baked loaf and taste the chewy interior, savoring the faint sourness of fermentation. Nefru smiles knowingly. "Bread carries the day," she says. "It fuels the body, the mind, and sometimes even the spirit." Historians still argue whether the daily rituals surrounding bread making were more practical or symbolic, but evidence suggests both elements were present. Bread maintained the household economy, nourished laborers, and provided offerings for religious observances. It was a medium through which families connected to gods, neighbors, and ancestors. You watch Nefru demonstrate the careful division of dough before shaping. Some portions will go to laborers in the fields, others to the temple, and a few remain for the household's own meals. The process is gentle, almost ceremonial. She measures portions with her hands, ensuring fairness and consistency. A quiet reminder that bread sustains not just bodies, but social bonds. Quirky tidbit: some communities practiced symbolic loaf blessings, where a small pinch of dough was kissed or held to the forehead before baking. This act was thought to infuse the bread with good fortune. Historians still debate the prevalence of these rituals, but they add a charming human dimension to the otherwise utilitarian process. You follow Nefru's lead as she shapes the loaves. Her fingers press, fold, and score, leaving delicate patterns. You notice how each household's bread carries a unique signature, a reflection of personal care and familial identity. The process is as much about aesthetics as function, a small artistry embedded in everyday labor. As the day unfolds, the courtyard settles into a quiet rhythm. Children play near the river, women attend to small tasks, and the loaves rest under linen covers, absorbing the warmth of the sun and air. The scent of grain and yeast lingers, mingling with faint river breezes. You inhale deeply, feeling the subtle hum of life and labor intertwine. The sun tilts lower, casting soft shadows across the courtyard. Nefru gathers the finished loaves and places them into baskets for cooling and distribution. The quiet efficiency of the household reminds you that in ancient Egypt, daily life, labor, and ritual were inseparable. Each loaf carries not only sustenance, but also history, devotion, and care. You take a moment to rest, brushing flour from your hands, and look around the courtyard. The baskets are filled, the children play quietly, and the oven waits patiently for tomorrow's work. There's a profound calm in this domestic rhythm, a gentle reminder that even the simplest tasks can be sacred when approached with care and intention. By the time the sun rises fully over the Nile, the courtyard feels alive with quiet anticipation. The air is warmer now, and faint smells of grain, reeds, and baked bread linger like a soft memory. Today, Nefru takes you beyond the household walls to see how bread connects to the larger world, how loaves travel from ovens to markets, linking homes, temples, and communities in a quiet network of trade and sustenance. You step into the street, a narrow lane lined with mud brick buildings and open-air stalls. The sounds are subtle but steady. A donkey brays in the distance, the soft shuffle of sandals on compacted earth, the distant splash of water from the river. Here, life hums in patterns, predictable and yet full of variation. The baker's loaves, your loaves in a way, are destined for this bustling environment. Nefru hands you a woven basket filled with freshly baked bread. Its weight is familiar, comforting. You notice that even outside the courtyard, the smell of grain and yeast draws attention. A nearby child pauses mid-step, sniffing the air, and an older woman looks toward you with recognition. Bread is universal, both nourishment and silent signal of community life. In ancient Egypt, markets were hubs of daily commerce, where bakers sold loaves alongside vegetables, fish, pottery, and textiles. Marketplaces operated on both formal and informal networks, with household bakers supplying neighbors, temples, or traders. Historians still argue how regulated these networks were, but evidence suggests a mix of familial, communal, and professional arrangements. You follow Nefru to a shaded stall near the edge of the market. The table is lined with reed mats, and you place the loaves carefully, arranging them by size and type. Some are simple, plain loaves for everyday consumption. Others are ornate, small spirals or stamped patterns, destined for temple offerings or wealthier buyers. The act of presentation feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. The bread itself is both product and statement. In some markets, bakers would use bread as barter, exchanging loaves for fish, vegetables, or even tools. Some historians suggest that the playful markings on certain loaves served as early brand signatures, allowing customers to recognize favored bakers at a glance. You smile at the thought of ancient logos stamped in flour and dough, subtle yet meaningful. As people begin to arrive, you notice the flow of traffic. Neighbors carrying baskets, children trailing behind parents, traders haggling softly over prices. The soundscape is gentle, not chaotic. Dust rises in lazy clouds, birds chirp intermittently, and the occasional bray or bark punctuates the rhythm. It's a calm, human orchestra of daily life. Nefru watches attentively, nudging a loaf toward a customer or exchanging quiet words. She explains how bakers often maintained reputations for reliability and flavor. Consistency mattered. A loaf that was too dense, too sour, or poorly baked could mean loss of trust and livelihood. Each basket carries not just bread, but confidence, skill, and care. Historians still argue whether bakers were considered skilled artisans or primarily domestic laborers. The evidence suggests both perspectives were true. Some households treated bread making as a domestic duty, while others recognized the craft and subtle expertise required. Today, watching Nefru move among the stalls, you can see why she embodies both roles seamlessly. You hand a loaf to a woman who examines it with practiced fingers, testing its texture and scent. She smiles and nods approvingly, handing you a small bundle of vegetables in exchange. The transaction feels more like an agreement than a sale, a moment of trust and mutual understanding. You pass another basket to a man waiting nearby. He lifts the loaves carefully, murmuring thanks before disappearing into the crowd. Quirky detail, some loaves bore tiny incisions or flower patterns that acted as secret codes, indicating price, quality, or intended buyer. Historians still debate how standardized these markings were, but they add a layer of subtle communication to everyday commerce. You realize that even in simple trade, there's a language of bread, unspoken but widely understood. As the morning passes, you observe other bakers arriving with baskets, carrying loaves shaped and baked in countless styles. Some are simple and functional, meant for laborers in fields or builders on construction sites. Others are elaborate, destined for temple offerings or the homes of the wealthy. Patterns of demand influence production, and bakers adjust carefully, balancing supply, skill, and tradition. The market is not merely transactional, it's a living network. Bread connects people, households, and institutions. A loaf purchased here may feed a family, offer sustenance to temple workers, or travel as far as another town along the Nile. You watch as a small donkey cart is loaded with baskets of bread, heading toward distant neighborhoods. The subtle clatter of hooves on cobblestone fades, leaving only the gentle hum of life. Nefru pauses to show you how traders and bakers communicated across distances. Small marks, symbols, and packaging techniques helped ensure that bread maintained quality during transport. Some baskets were lined with reed mats, others with linen or palm leaves. Historians still debate the full extent of these methods, but the ingenuity is clear. Bread was a portable, trusted form of nourishment, capable of sustaining both body and social networks. You take a moment to breathe in the warm, yeasty air. It carries more than scent. It carries stories, effort, and care. Each loaf represents labor, patience, and the quiet rhythm of life along the Nile. You understand now that market life is not just about exchange. It is about sustaining a network of trust, memory, and continuity. By midday, most of the loaves are gone, carried off in baskets or consumed on the spot. The market slows to a gentle hum, dust settling in soft waves across the courtyard. You watch Nefru gather the remaining baskets, arranging them carefully for return to the household or temple. Each loaf has found its purpose, moving along invisible threads that connect people and places. The sun tilts low, and the marketplace empties gradually. Traders pack away tools, children retreat to quiet corners, and the faint smell of bread lingers, mingling with dust, herbs, and river air. You stand quietly, reflecting on the journey of each loaf. From grain to kneaded dough, from oven to basket, from hand to hand, from courtyard to market. Quirky thought, in some regions, bakers even left small test loaves at the market just to gauge temperature, humidity, or yeast activity for the next day. Historians still debate whether this was routine or exceptional, but it's a charming reminder that even in commerce, observation and care matter deeply. As you walk back toward the household, Nefru touches your shoulder gently. Bread travels farther than you think, she says. It carries stories, sustains bodies, and connects the living to the past. Every loaf matters. The statement lingers like sunlight on the warm clay. You realize that market life is not just commerce. It is continuity, connection, and care embodied in the simplest of foods. Bread, it seems, is never just bread. As the afternoon sun begins to mellow, casting long golden shadows over the mud brick walls, Nefru guides you to a quieter part of the household courtyard. The day's baking is largely done, the last loaves cooling gently on reed mats, and now attention turns to the deeper, symbolic role of bread in Egyptian life. Festivals, offerings, and the subtle ways each loaf embodies connection to the divine. You notice immediately the small altar set against the wall, adorned with fresh flowers, tiny vessels of water, and bowls of fragrant oil. A few loaves have already been placed there, arranged carefully in spirals and ovals, each bearing small incisions or patterns meant to honor the gods. The sight is calm, understated, yet profoundly reverent. Even in ordinary households, bread carried sacred significance, bridging the human and divine. Nefru selects a small spiral loaf from a basket and places it gently on the altar. "Some bread is not just to feed," she murmurs. "It feeds the gods and in return sustains us." The simplicity of the statement feels enormous. The notion that nourishment can be both material and spiritual, that something as humble as a loaf of bread carries intention, devotion, and care. Egyptians regularly offered bread in temples, tombs, and household shrines. Archaeologists have found clay models and inscriptions depicting bread as offerings to deities, sometimes alongside beer, fruit, or incense. Historians still argue whether the types of bread differed according to social class or ritual purpose, but the practice itself was widespread and enduring. You watch as Nefru sprinkles a few grains of spelt on top of another loaf, then lightly scores it with a small reed. The markings are subtle, almost invisible from a distance, but each carries meaning. Some represent deities, others cycles of the sun, and some simply indicate the intended recipient, god, ancestor, or household member. You realize that every loaf is simultaneously food, message, and miniature work of art. Quirky detail: in some festivals, bakers created small bread figurines shaped like animals, birds, or symbolic objects, which were offered to gods or left in tombs. Some of these loaves were designed to be edible, others purely symbolic. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but the creativity and care are undeniable. You chuckle softly, imagining a tiny loaf shaped like a crocodile or ibis, baked for a god who probably had no need for calories. The courtyard hums quietly as preparations for a local festival begin. Children arrange palm fronds along the edges of the mats. Women sort flowers into small bundles, and a faint melody drifts from the temple down the lane. Bread here is not just sustenance. It is central to the ritual rhythm, a physical manifestation of devotion and celebration. Nefru kneads a fresh batch of dough, folding in a small amount of starter and sprinkling in barley grains for texture. "Every loaf must be right," she says. "Too dense and it offends, too soft and it lacks respect." Her words feel slightly humorous, slightly serious, a reminder that care, precision, and intention mattered as much in the spiritual realm as in daily life. You notice how the shapes differ from the loaves made for household consumption. Some are tall and conical, others flat and round. Some are stamped with hieroglyphs, others carry delicate spiral patterns. Each shape is intentional, chosen to match a festival, offering, or symbolic purpose. The act of shaping becomes ritual itself, a bridge between daily labor and sacred life. Historians still argue whether the choice of shapes or decorations was uniform across regions or highly localized. Evidence from tombs and temple reliefs shows variation, suggesting that bakers tailored loaves according to context, occasion, and audience. Some households emphasized aesthetic beauty, while others prioritized symbolism or utility. You help Nefru carry baskets of bread toward the small altar, noticing how the arrangement creates a quiet balance of shapes, colors, and textures. Even the spacing seems intentional, as though the loaves themselves form a dialogue with one another and with the divine. A few loaves are destined for the temple, a short walk down the lane. Nefru carefully wraps them in linen, ensuring they remain intact. You observe the gentle respect with which each loaf is handled. No hurried movements, no rough gestures. Bread, it seems, has dignity. It is humble but sacred, practical yet imbued with meaning. Quirky detail. Some bakers added tiny portions of honey, herbs, or dates to festival bread. While most people might have eaten simple loaves daily, these enriched versions were special, signaling devotion, celebration, or prosperity. Historians still debate whether these additions were widespread or reserved for wealthier households, but they highlight the subtle creativity baked into ritual. As you place a small spiral loaf on the altar, you pause and inhale the combined scent of warm dough, barley, and faint incense. There is a profound stillness here, a quiet pulse of life and devotion. You sense how bread transcends the ordinary, connecting human effort to ritual significance and divine acknowledgement. The festival preparations continue as Nefru explains how offerings were distributed afterward. Some loaves would remain at the altar, others given to priests or neighbors, and some shared among the household. Bread moves seamlessly between sacred and mundane realms, nourishing body and spirit alike. You watch children carry small trays to distant corners of the courtyard, each loaf a miniature gift, each gesture part of a rhythm of care. The hum of the day softens into a gentle lull, the air fragrant with warmth, yeast, and devotion. You realize that festivals and offerings are not separate from daily life. They are woven into it, giving ordinary bread layers of meaning beyond mere sustenance. As the sun tilts low, the courtyard glows with soft orange light. Nefru sits on the ground beside the altar, brushing flour from her hands. You sit quietly beside her, letting the weight of the day settle. The loaves rest, the air hums faintly, and the scent of grain and yeast carries a subtle spiritual resonance. Historians still argue about the full spectrum of symbolism embedded in these rituals, but the continuity is clear. Bread represents connection, labor, devotion, and care. Each loaf embodies the skill of the baker, the rhythm of domestic life, and the presence of the divine. You realize that bread is never merely bread here. It is a living thread connecting households, markets, temples, and gods, weaving together daily life and eternal cycles. The courtyard feels suspended in quiet reverence, a moment of timeless continuity in which labor, ritual, and spirit meet gently. The late afternoon sun stretches long shadows across the courtyard, softening the mud brick walls into gentle tones of gold and rose. You lean back against the low ledge, letting your hands rest, still faintly dusted with flour, still warm from kneading and shaping countless loaves. The work of the day has slowed, and you take a deep breath, inhaling the lingering aroma of grain, yeast, and warm dough. For a moment, time itself seems suspended, and you reflect on the journey that each loaf has taken, from humble grain to nourishing bread, from oven to altar, from household to market, and finally, from past to present, in the quiet continuity of human life. Every motion of the day, the grinding, the sifting, the kneading, the shaping, the scoring, carries significance beyond mere sustenance. Each loaf embodies centuries of accumulated knowledge, patient observation, and hands-on skill. You realize that the seemingly simple act of making bread is in fact a profound dialogue with nature, culture, and time. Nefru's quiet guidance has shown you that care, rhythm, and attention are as essential as flour, water, and yeast. A mainstream fact comes to mind: The techniques and tools used in ancient Egypt laid the foundation for baking practices that endure to this day. From querns to clay ovens, from starter cultures to kneading techniques, these methods were refined over centuries, creating loaves that nourished both body and society. Historians still debate the specifics of regional variations, but the continuity of practice is undeniable. You glance at the remaining loaves, now cool and settled on reed mats. Some bear intricate patterns, symbols, or stamps, subtle markers of intention, purpose, and artistry. Others are simple, everyday forms, quietly functional yet no less meaningful. The juxtaposition reminds you that in ancient Egypt, as in life, the extraordinary and the ordinary coexist seamlessly, often within the same space. Quirky tidbit, some loaves were crafted with hidden shapes or small inclusions of fruit or seeds, intended to bring luck, health, or prosperity to the eater. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were, but it's charming to imagine tiny surprises tucked inside humble bread, like secret messages from the past to those who would consume them. You close your eyes for a moment, recalling the sensory symphony of the day. The hiss of steam from cooling loaves, the rhythmic scrape of querns, the faint pop of bubbles in fermenting dough, the soft laughter of children playing near the river. Each sound, smell, and texture is a memory, a bridge linking you to the countless hands that have kneaded dough before yours. Bread, it seems, is both ephemeral and enduring, fleeting on the tongue, but immortal in practice. The wind drifts through the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of river water and reeds. You watch dust motes float lazily in the sunlight, catching the warm glow like tiny golden sparks. The soft rustle of palm fronds outside the courtyard merges with the distant murmur of life along the Nile. In this gentle, suspended moment, the world feels intimate, tactile, and profoundly peaceful. Nefru sits beside you, her hands brushing lightly over the surface of a cooled loaf. She speaks softly. Bread remembers. Every hand, every fold, every oven fire leaves a trace. And in each bite, that memory lives again. Her words linger in your mind like a gentle echo, emphasizing the continuity and interconnectedness of life, labor, and sustenance. As the courtyard settles into quietude, you notice the subtle transition of day to evening. Shadows deepen, the air cools, and the scent of yeast and grain becomes softer, more diffuse, blending with the faint smoke of evening fires. It is a time of calm reflection, of winding down, of letting the rhythm of labor settle into memory. You take a small piece of one of the cooled loaves and break it slowly, feeling the soft interior give under your fingers. The texture is springy yet tender, the aroma faint but comforting. You taste it, and in that simple bite, you are connected to the grain, to the Nile, to the hands that shaped it, and to centuries of quiet, unbroken practice. Bread is nourishment, yes, but it is also story, memory, and continuity. Quirky thought. In some households, leftover crumbs were saved for birds, sprinkled in the fields, or even offered to spirits. Historians still debate the ritual significance, but it's a tender reminder that nothing in ancient Egyptian life was entirely wasted, and that even the smallest fragment could carry meaning. You find yourself watching the dust fall gently over the courtyard floor, imagining how each particle is part of a cycle, connecting past to present in invisible ways. Now, the sun has slipped almost entirely behind distant hills. The courtyard is awash in soft twilight, the air cool and gentle against your skin. The last baskets of bread are stored or distributed. Children have returned to play quietly indoors, and the gentle rhythm of domestic life has ebbed for the day. You exhale slowly, feeling the quiet completion of labor, and the calm satisfaction that comes from meaningful work. Slowly, deliberately, you let your thoughts drift. Imagine the Nile glimmering in the distance, the soft murmur of water carrying life and time alike. The courtyard is silent except for a faint breeze, carrying warmth, history, and the scent of grain. Let each breath mirror the gentle rise and fall of fermenting dough, the slow pulse of human effort and care that extends across generations. The wind down is soft. You release tension from shoulders and arms, letting your body sink into comfort. Words, movements, and thoughts become slower, gentler, less urgent. You reflect on the journey of bread, its origins in soil and sun, its shaping by patient hands, its ritual and practical significance, and its enduring presence in both household and society. You feel a sense of quiet gratitude for the ordinary and extraordinary, for labor and creativity, for continuity and care. In the calm, fading light, the courtyard becomes a place of meditation. Each loaf, each grain, each trace of flour holds memory. Each motion, each fold, each breath carries life forward. You imagine resting here for a moment, letting the sounds, textures, and smells seep into your consciousness, softening the day and grounding you in the enduring rhythm of human life. And as you do, you realize something profound. Bread is never just bread. It is history, ritual, sustenance, artistry, and memory intertwined. It carries the past into the present, the hands of bakers into yours, the quiet hum of life into the stillness of evening. You are part of that continuity now, a single heartbeat in the unbroken rhythm of centuries. Now, let the warmth of the day fade gently into night. Let the aromas, textures, and sounds settle in your memory. The loaves rest, the courtyard rests, and you too rest, carried softly by the quiet pulse of life, labor, and history. Slowly, breathe in the fading sense of grain, yeast, and warm dough. Let your shoulders soften, your arms release, and your mind drift. The courtyard glows faintly in twilight, shadows stretching long and gentle, carrying with them the quiet echoes of labor and care. Remember the gentle hiss of cooling loaves, the rhythmic scrape of corns, the tender fold of dough beneath practiced hands. Let each memory of movement and smell lull you into a sense of calm, continuity, and comfort. Picture the Nile in the distance, its waters carrying life quietly forward, just as each loaf has carried nourishment, devotion, and history across generations. The air is soft, the wind gentle, the faint murmur of life continuing beyond the walls. Allow the rhythm of the day to slow within you, mirroring the gentle rise and fall of fermenting dough, the tender pulse of human effort and care. As your body and mind soften, feel gratitude for ordinary and extraordinary alike. Each loaf, each grain, each touch of hands in flour and water is part of a timeless story. Let the continuity, care, and quiet artistry of bread making carry you into stillness, close your eyes, let the warmth linger, and drift, knowing you are connected to the past, present, and the soft hum of life. End of script. Sweet dreams.